When you need an attorney, experience matters.
Past success matters.
Attention to detail matters.
Prince Glover Hayes is celebrating 40 years.
40 years as a civil litigation firm.
And delivers over 100 years.
Over 100 years of combined experience.
We've been able to obtain some of the largest jury verdicts and settlements in the state of Alabama for our clients.
We will fight.
We will fight.
We will fight to make sure our clients
get the justice they deserve.
Here at Prince Glover Hayes, we counsel.
We advocate.
We litigate.
And we are devoted to helping you.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike Royer. Along with Josh Hayes, we welcome you to People's Law School. It's a program brought to you by Prince Glover Hayes Law Firm here in Tuscaloosa. On this program, we deal with subjects that are important to you and your family. And tonight, our topic is the ongoing opioid crisis in this country and the related litigation to that problem. Our host for our program, attorney Josh Hayes. Josh.
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, everyone. My firm is proud to be a sponsor of this program, the People's Law School. I'm Josh Hayes, a personal injury attorney here in Tuscaloosa at Prince Glover Hayes, and tonight our topic is the opioid epidemic and the resulting litigation that this crisis has forced upon our country, and particularly the state of Alabama, who my firm represents. I'd like to start out by showing you a photo that kind of epitomizes how this crisis has affected families. This is a photograph from the police department in East Liverpool, Ohio, and it's a tragic situation where at the wheel of a running automobile, two parents are passed out as a result of opioid overdose, and their child is strapped in the back seat with no one to care for him. A real-world example of a problem that the pharmaceutical industry in this country has created. So let's take a look at some numbers of the crisis that will help us better understand what we're dealing with. Every day in this country, more than 90 people die as a result of overdosing on opioids. There have been in Alabama from 2006 through 2014, over 5,000 deaths, and in the year 2015 alone, more than 700 deaths just from overdosing from opioids. Forget cocaine, forget car wrecks, we're talking only prescription opioid overdoses or heroin overdoses. In the year 2012, there were 239 million prescriptions of opioid pain medications were written. And then this last statistic is very telling. Over the last 15 years in the United States, the number of prescription opioids sold has quadrupled, even though statistics have shown that the level of pain and disability has remained unchanged. And so what does that tell us? The pain scale, the pain assessment tool on the bottom of the screen there was created by the pharmaceutical industry. We all now know that when we go to the doctor's office, you're asked about pain almost every time. That was not the case before 15 years ago, actually before 2001 when the pain scale was adopted. Pain has become what's called the fifth vital sign. The only problem with that is that pain is a subjective finding only most of the time. The other four can be objectively measured. The other four are the respiratory rate, your temperature, your heart rate, and your blood pressure. See, all of those a doctor can actually objectively say whether you're have, for instance, high or low blood pressure or your temperature is off. With pain, doctors were taught at the pharmaceutical industry's behest to use this scale and they were almost shamed into making sure that people were pain-free. And what we have learned over the course of this epidemic, and as we're getting into the litigation, what we've learned is that it's really not realistic for a person to be 100% pain-free, especially as we age. And so the drugs that were meant for end-of-life care, like cancer, hospice care, that's what opioids were intended for. And over the course of many years of slick pharmaceutical salespeople coming into doctors' offices, that has led us to this point where family doctors and orthopedists and dentists, people who never were intended originally to prescribe opioids, have now been routinely prescribing opioids, which led us to this crisis. Some numbers in Alabama: there were 508 million prescriptions for opioids in the year 2015, and that's according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. And that's enough for 1.2 prescriptions for every citizen of Alabama. Think about that. Every year, every citizen in the state per capita would have had more than one opioid prescription. And that, again, is just not how it was intended to be at the outset. And the reason that is important is that it's not only prescription opioids that are killing people. Ultimately, that leads to heroin abuse. Because you see, 80% of people who abuse heroin started out being a prescription opioid addict. So they're directly correlated. And again, we believe this litigation will show that's a creation of the pharmaceutical industry. For the first time in the United States history, heroin overdose deaths outnumber those for gun homicides. That's incredible. There are some states where heroin overdose deaths are account for more deaths every year than automobile accidents. It's quickly escalating to the point that one day it's probably going to be the leading cause of death. That's unless we can do something about it. My firm is proud to be part of a team that is trying to do something about that. The CDC also reports that there has been a 200% increase in opioid overdose deaths in the last 14-year period from 2000 to 2014. So that's a look at some of the numbers. Let's talk a little bit about the drugs themselves. What are we talking about when we talk about a prescription opioid? I mentioned earlier that heroin is an opioid. It comes from the poppy seed, which has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. If you remember your history, China fought multiple wars over the poppy seed. And so this has been a long-time problem, but has only recently ravaged our communities, particularly in rural Alabama and rural America. The prescription opioids there on the screen, probably the most popular one, the one that many of us have heard of the most, is OxyContin. The contin comes from what was supposed to be a continuous release pill that was, the deal with OxyContin, the reason it was so popular to begin with is that it was supposed to last for 12 hours. Well, not only was that not true, and doctors were having to prescribe more and more of it, there were also those same family practice doctors who, again, did not have the training initially, were encouraged to increase the dose. There was even a term that was again created by someone who worked for the pharmaceutical industry that says, you know what, these people, they're not showing signs of addiction, they're showing signs of something called pseudo-addiction. And guess what that meant to those pharmaceutical drug reps? That meant you should prescribe them more and not less opioids. And so the rest of the drugs there are on the screen. They're common drugs that are used every day. And again, I'm not saying that prescription opioids don't have a place, because they certainly do. But what I am saying is they have been overprescribed, and they are certainly being abused today. Mike, do we have any questions this evening?
We do, Josh. Amanda has a good question. She's from Trussville, and she asked this: can pharmacies fill a controlled substance prescription from a different state, and can that prescription be transferred from state to state?
Yeah, Mike, you know, is an excellent question. It's been a big problem as states seek to enforce their own laws when you have people from out of state coming across state lines. It has happened. It is not supposed to happen, and the laws are getting tighter on that, but that has been a big problem, which is why in states like Ohio and West Virginia, you have pill mills that have popped up right on borders, and folks from both sides of the state come over and they're able to fill, in the past at least, prescriptions from multiple pharmacies in both states. So I mentioned earlier that there's some litigation ongoing. My firm is honored to be a part of that. Let's take a look at the litigation and specifically who of our clients are. We are honored to be one of two firms that were hired by Attorney General Steve Marshall to represent the state of Alabama. We also represent numerous counties and cities across this state and are part of a national consortium of law firms that represent over 200 cities and counties, local governments who have been some of the hardest hit as a result of this crisis. We represent large cities such as Cleveland and Miami. We also represent the city of Birmingham, our team does. And really our main focus is to ensure that, number one, we do our part to stop this crisis, and number two, any settlement funds that are received or jury verdicts down through the years go directly to the state and to the cities so that this crisis can be mitigated and prevented in the future. We were honored to be hired by Attorney General Marshall, and what led him to this is the statistic that is in bold there that is absolutely amazing. Alabama is first in the nation for the number of painkiller prescriptions, again, mostly opioids, per capita. As a result, it's estimated that over 30,000 of our residents over the age of 17 are dependent upon either heroin or prescription opioids. Now, if that's not a public health crisis, I don't know what is, because a lot of people believe those estimates are actually low and that there is plenty of underreporting that goes on because most of our county coroners are not trained in medical techniques or examination, and so they may not be asking the right questions to determine whether a death is actually opioid related or not. It's clear just from the graph that opioid deaths have skyrocketed from the late 90s into 2015, and the research suggests, and the proof is, that that is directly tied to the introduction of OxyContin into our market, and then the other opioids that came after OxyContin when other pharmaceutical giants got into the business also. Particularly, I'd like to talk a little bit about OxyContin and the maker of OxyContin, which is Purdue Pharmaceuticals. They're based in Stamford, Connecticut, and they are owned, they're not a publicly traded company, they are a Fortune 500 company, but they are a closely held company owned by one family, and that's the Sackler family. There's plenty of literature you can read on that. In fact, the last slide tonight will have some recommended reading for those of you more interested in the topic. But the Sacklers, as a result of only the sale of OxyContin, it's estimated that they have profited over $35 billion in profits related to OxyContin alone. Amazing. So what have they done with that money? They've named museums after themselves across the world. There's a Sackler Gallery at Harvard. There's a Sackler Museum at the Met in New York City. There's a Sackler wing of the Louvre in Paris, France. They have endowed professorships across the nation at some of our finest institutions. And again, we hope this litigation will shine a bright light on this family and what they have done to our country. The law is pretty clear as to what pharmaceutical companies are supposed to do. There are duties for both manufacturers like Purdue and distributors such as Cardinal Health, AmerisourceBergen, and other distributors that are charged by Congress under the Controlled Substances Act that there are certain restrictions on prescription opioids. And the main idea of that act was to prevent what's called the diversion of legal prescriptions. In other words, taking a prescription that was meant for one person or one pharmacy and letting those pills get distributed among a community across state lines, which has certainly happened. And so under both federal law and Alabama law, manufacturers and distributors, the companies moving it from where it was produced up to the pharmacy where it's ultimately sold, they have a duty to monitor, to detect, to investigate, and ultimately to report any suspicious orders. Now, what's a suspicious order? Well, it's spelled out in the law, but it might look something like this. If you have a small pharmacy, say in Walker County, Alabama, which is one of our hardest hit communities, and they are selling more than 50 times what a pharmacy in Jefferson County, Alabama is, which is certainly a larger population, should that alert the companies? Well, not only do we think it should as lawyers, but the law says it should too. And this whole system has failed. The companies have failed, and the DEA, frankly, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has failed our country, and that's led us to where we are today. Mike, I understand we have another question this evening.
Josh, Betty from Northport has this question tonight. Who bears legal responsibility for the over-availability of prescription opioids, the drug companies or the medical community?
Yeah, that is a good question, Mike, and the answer is there's some responsibility, we believe, that goes all the way around. Certainly with the patients sometimes, the doctors sometimes, who are willingly, knowingly overprescribing, and that's not many, but there are a few. And then we believe the bulk of the responsibility lies with the pharmaceutical industry because they are guilty and have pled guilty to intentionally misbranding their drugs, saying things like, these drugs have no potential for abuse, they're not addictive, when they know exactly the otherwise. So there's plenty of responsibility to go all the way around, both in the medical community and in the industry. Who are some of the bad actors in this litigation? Some of these are named defendants in the state of Alabama's case, and others are not yet added. The Attorney General is very specific. He wants to have plenty of proof before we bring a new defendant into the case, and I certainly understand and respect that. But these are some of the common defendants from around the country. A lot of our cities and counties in Alabama have sued all of these companies. Again, Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen, those are the distribution companies that get drugs from place to place. And then the rest of those companies, Purdue, Endo, Janssen, again, another multinational Fortune 5 company, forget Fortune 500, but Fortune 5 company, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson, and the others listed on the screen. So the biggest of the big corporations is who we're going after in this lawsuit. This is not the first time that this issue has been raised. In fact, over a decade ago, the DEA first started noticing in 2006 and 2007 this problem with diversion, and they sat about to try to fix the problem. And so the DEA has investigatory powers. They have the right to not only put people in jail, but they can civilly fine companies and level criminal fines also. And they went after some of these companies as early as 06 and 07. You can see the astronomical fines that have been paid, but the problem is when you find a company like McKesson, $150 million, but they have profits of hundreds of billions of dollars, that amount and those amounts just simply have not gotten these companies' attention. Purdue there at the bottom, that's one of the largest civil fines in United States history, over $600 million. 3 of their corporate executives pled guilty but avoided jail time, and that company is still, to this day, wreaking havoc across our nation. And so this case is pending in what's called the MDL. That's the multi-district litigation, which is based in Cleveland, Ohio. There have been over 700 lawsuits filed across the country. The state of Alabama is just one of those. We are trying to get in the driver's seat to be one of the first cases heard because we believe Alabama has a unique case in a lot of respects. And so the MDL is made up of various law firms, various plaintiffs' lawyers across the country, various defense lawyers across the country that are representing these large multinational companies. And the idea is that we are seeking to abate the crisis. In other words, to stop it, to put a stop to it, to put an end to it. But you can't just stop it and then wait on the next crisis to happen, because that's what these companies would do, is just produce another drug. We're going to look to fund treatment programs. We're going to look to repair some of the damage that has been done in the state and across our communities. Mike, is there a question from the audience?
Taylor has this question, Josh. Should addiction be treated as an issue of public health or one of criminal justice?
That is a good question, Mike. It is certainly a public health crisis that we're dealing with. I'll give you a good example of that. They're one of the largest growing segments of our population that is addicted to opioids are what's called opioid-addicted babies. Certainly there could be no criminal responsibility there. That's certainly only public health. But a lot of times it's both. There are certainly criminal punishments that need to be handed out both to abusers from time to time, and certainly doctors and companies who have peddled these drugs, harmful drugs, into our community. But the answer to that question is certainly both. As I mentioned, we're part of a team that has filed over 200 of these cases. There are 700 plus across the country now. There are new cases filed every day, and that is all consolidated in front of one federal judge in Cleveland, Ohio, Judge Dan Polster, who has encouraged early resolution of this case. Not only are we looking for past damages, in other words, retrospective damages, but we're looking at damages in the future. You can see there on your screen such things as increased cost for EMS and first responders. There is a new drug that will reverse an opioid overdose called Narcan, and we're seeking to repay, to pay for those for local police departments. There are all kind of increased costs like foster care, medical examiners, coroners, drug courts, increased jail cost because solely of the opioid epidemic. So in addition to those looking back damages, we're also looking, as I mentioned earlier, looking in the future, prospective damages. And so the idea there is a central question, and it's on your screen. What will it take to clean up the mess that the drug companies have created? How much will that cost? And I can tell you that figure is in the billions of dollars, because this is not a small problem. This is a problem that reaches across ethnic lines, it reaches across socioeconomic lines. Almost all of us in the audience, and certainly probably a lot watching from home, have had this epidemic touch our families, and the problem is only getting worse and not better. Future health care cost, rehab treatment cost, how it's impacted our court system, how it's impacted our economic development system. Those are all damages that our experts are looking at going forward to see what a fair settlement would be in this case. The next slide will show a list of state agencies that have been impacted, and that is something we are currently working on in the litigation, is visiting with all these agencies to see how they have been impacted and what their damages are. For instance, DHR, Department of Human Resources, I met with them last week, and there are over 6,000 current open cases where opioids is an issue, 6,000. That means at least 6,000 children whose parents have been impacted and whose lives will probably never be the same because of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical community. Particularly as it relates to the state's case, the next slide has an astronomical list of damages that are annual damages. It is, in addition to the fines, which reach into the billions of dollars, we have a consumer protection statute called the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, and they are eligible for fines every year from $400 million at a minimum to $3.2 billion. But you can see the healthcare costs are over $63 million. The cost to our justice system, $70 million, and on and on and on. The costs are astronomical in this case. So our next slide there has a list of helpful resources. I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of these. There is an excellent website for the multi-district litigation in Ohio that kind of spells out a lot of what's going on with the case. You can actually read some of the pleadings in the case, which are the position papers of the parties, to kind of get a feel for the issues in the case. And then there are a multitude of good articles and books. I only picked out a few that are all excellent. I've read and watched them all. Probably one of the best is that second one there, Dreamland, which was written by an investigative reporter. And it's fascinating because it takes both prescription opioid, particularly OxyContin abusers from Purdue Pharmaceutical, and how that moved east from Connecticut, and then it has the origin of black tar heroin in Mexico, a Pacific state in heroin, how that moved east, and the prescriptions moved west, and they met in Ohio and West Virginia, and absolutely wrecked those communities. Absolutely wrecked those communities. And that ultimately led us to where we are in Alabama too. The next book there is Painkiller. It does an excellent job of talking about the Sackler family and their corruption and greed, which led us to the point we are today, as does the article in the New Yorker there by Patrick O'Keefe. And then finally, there's a new book out called Dope Sick, which is by Beth Macy, and it is an excellent read about the opioid epidemic as well. Finally, for those Netflix watchers out there, there's an excellent 30-minute or 40-minute documentary called Heroin, and that's heroin with an E because it's a play on that word. It follows one EMT who's a female in one town in West Virginia, and her job all day, every day, is to go around reviving heroin addicts. That's what she does 8 hours every day by squirting Narcan into their nose, bringing them back to life, and trying to save their lives long term. So this is a true epidemic in this country. It is not an exaggeration. I think our president has even referred to it as a public health crisis, and it certainly is. My firm is honored that Attorney General Marshall has chosen my firm to be one of two firms that represent the state. We're on the front lines, and since that has happened, we get calls and calls from family members around the state who have lost loved ones. We are available to talk to you to see if there is a potential case for you, but you know, it's a terrible situation, and we're glad both to be a sponsor of this show and to be involved in this litigation.
Josh, thanks very much. Obviously an important topic, and as I listened to you tonight, it struck me this doesn't affect a portion of our society, a few people. It affects every person and every family in Alabama. We thank you for watching People's Law School. We hope you'll join us again next time. For Josh Hayes and everyone at Prince Glover Hayes Law Firm here in Tuscaloosa, I'm Mike Royer. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.
When you need an attorney, experience matters.
Past success matters.
Attention to detail matters.
Prince Glover Hayes is celebrating 40 years.
40 years as a civil litigation firm.
And delivers over 100 years.
Over 100 years of combined experience.
We've been able to obtain some of the largest jury verdicts and settlements in the state of Alabama for our clients.
We will fight.
We will fight.
We will fight to make sure our clients
get the justice they deserve.
Here at Prince Glover Hayes, we counsel.
We advocate.
we litigate.
And we are devoted to helping you.
People's Law School is brought to you by Prince Glover Hayes as a community outreach class offered by the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute.